Day 74 of the Trump administration, and while somewhere in the West Wing there is no doubt a strategy and an action plan for this week, including today, this week started like so many others have. The president took to Twitter starting at 6:15 a.m., repeated his grievance with the Obama administration. He said he'd been wiretapped by the former president, and relitigated the campaign against Hillary Clinton. This came after he sent his son-in-law to Iraq with an official U.S. delegation. The business of the White House, that part is busy right now. A Senate confirmation vote for Supreme Court later this week. And just today, the visit of Egypt's authoritarian president. But let's start on Twitter, as the president chose to. Quote, "Such amazing reporting on unmasking and the crooked scheme against us by Fox and friends. Spied on before nomination. The real story." Then, did Hillary Clinton ever apologize for receiving the answers to the debate? Just asking. Then later, Fox News from multiple sources. There was electronic surveillance of Trump and people close to Trump. This is unprecedented. He tweeted that last bit to the FBI. And just a reminder, members of both houses and Senate Intelligence Committees from both sides of the aisle say there's no evidence of this wiretapping. Elsewhere on the Russia front, NBC News confirming Eric Prince, the founder of the private security firm Blackwater of Iraq War fame, represented Donald Trump at a secret overseas meeting convened by the UAE in early January. The Washington Post was first to publish the story, alleging the meeting was with, quote, a Russian close to President Vladimir Putin as part of an apparent effort to establish a back-channel line of communication between Moscow and then President-elect Donald Trump. According to reports, Eric Prince gave $250,000 to Trump's campaign and pro-Trump super PACs. He was seen in the Trump Transition's New York offices in December. He also happens to be the brother of the Trump administration's Education Secretary Betsy DeVos. One of our own sources confirmed the Washington Post version of the meeting, while a second cast doubt that that's what the meeting was about. A senior administration official called the suggestion of a Trump-Putin back channel ridiculous. White House Press Secretary Sean Spicer told us late this evening, quote, "We are not aware of any meetings, and Eric Prince had no role in the transition." We also learned late tonight that President Trump spoke with Vladimir Putin in the wake of today's deadly subway explosion in St. Petersburg. Bobby, we welcome you back to these shores. You have the only double life among us. You get to live over there and come back here. What is this story playing like over there?
Well, it's astonishing. The level of astonishment about the Donald Trump presidency just simply keeps rising.
Where do you start? Twitter or the Russia ties or?
Twitter, actually, the fact that you have a president who's speaking over the top of his entire administration directly to the American people, but speaking in this sort of really bizarre manner. It's sort of my newspaper almost every day, either online or in the paper. We're covering this because people are fascinated. This is the leader of the free world, or so we'd like to think. Every tweet he tweets out matters. People pay close attention.
Ashley, and this is the life we've chosen. This has become baked in to your life and your beat every day, that you get to witness, though they won't often always talk to you, a White House staff whipsawed, forced into reaction, as the news media are, every time the president starts his day like this, no matter what the agenda for the week.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. We at the Washington Post, we actually have a position called the hot seat, where one of the duties basically involves waking up with Donald Trump's Twitter account, because like his aides and like his senior advisors, we never know what he's going to say, but we always know it's going to be newsy.
And Michael Crowley, you get the toughest job of all. The Michael Flynn story kind of developed Friday night and over the weekend. The Carter Page story developed, kind of matured today. Susan Rice has been brought into this for unmasking, which the first and only thing we want to say about unmasking is it doesn't mean leaking. But have at one, two, or all three of those stories and how this narrative is being focused.
Well, quickly, I think Republicans are excited to have Susan Rice as a voodoo doll again. Of course, they loved to trash her back during the days of what they call the Benghazi scandal. And I think any excuse to get her name in the news, even if it's not going to change public opinion in the middle or on the left, she plays great in the chyrons on Fox News and right-wing talk radio. The Carter Page story is fascinating. BuzzFeed and ABC News about the same time reported that Carter Page, who Donald Trump himself said was an advisor to his campaign, was the target of a recruitment effort by known Russian spies who were in New York City, who were wiretapped, who were recorded long before Trump was a candidate. It has nothing to do with wiretapping Trump, talking about Carter Page being an idiot that they were recruiting and trying to get information from. Not clear how far that went. Last point quickly, Brian, on the big picture here, people are probably confused about the details of all this. It's hard to keep up. You know who loves that? Vladimir Putin. It's absolute chaos in Washington and in this country right now, and Putin loves that. It's destabilizing America. It's making our democracy look ridiculous. It's making our government weaker. And that is Russia's core goal here, and it's going great for them.
And, Bobby, we've had a former CIA director on this network say that, in his opinion, not enough attention has been paid to the point Michael just made. This was not a single incident attack or even one that took place over weeks or months. It's here. We're living in it. We have warring factions in our government, president versus media, and then some, a greater split between the parties than ever before, and much confusion over what's happening to us and what to do about it.
Yeah, and it's confusing from here, and it looks even more confusing from a distance. And it comes at a particularly bad time. The world needs leadership like it hasn't needed for much of my adult lifetime. You have serious problems, whether with climate, whether to do with Syria, whether to do with China. The world needs the American president to be focused, to be taking charge of things. And at this particular moment, to find an administration so dysfunctional is very disturbing to a lot of people. Now, I get a chance to travel to other places. I was recently in the Middle East about a month ago in Dubai, and you had people from all over the Middle East come for an event there, and everyone was scratching their heads. Everybody was exchanging notes, trying to figure out, do you know something about this administration that makes sense? Can you put together a pattern that the rest of us can then identify and follow? The unpredictability of this, I think Trump and maybe Trump's supporters like that. They think that puts them at an advantage. But in the field of international diplomacy, unpredictability is not a good thing. Most often, it leaves people guessing. It forces people to make decisions with incomplete facts. That is never a good thing.
Ashley, as is often Michael's role in that third box, he brought up another good point in that last conversation, and that was how this is playing, where actual Americans live. For us in the business and along the places where Amtrak stops in the Acela corridor, this is taking on a tumbleweed quality of an impossible-to-miss subplot about Russian ties 74 days into a young administration. It is on the outside, when it's not your job to follow it, the detail is crushing. So we have these two tracks that will always perhaps be parallel.
Yeah, even when it is your job to follow it, the detail can kind of be crushing. But I think the thing is there's sort of this drip, 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 and you don't know exactly, what the new meeting will be and which new advisor will have met with a Russian spy or a Russian envoy. But it just feels like the Trump administration cannot gain control of this narrative. And as we mentioned, this is someone who likes to operate in chaos, and it has often worked out for him. But the one thing that is really backfiring is a lot of these meetings have already happened and taken place, and you can't sort of go back and undo the past, but they can't get a hold of the narrative and sort of just establish what's coming out. And one thing that's interesting in these stories, including some that the Post have done, is when you go to the White House, they don't even have an awareness that this is an issue sometimes until a newspaper or or a television show brings this up to them, which is a real problem.
Michael, our control room has a full screen graphic of a conversation the FT, the Financial Times, had with the president. Another subplot here is we don't get access to him. Occasional photo ops, Twitter, and then the occasional press conference. But this was the most recent interview he granted. Do you regret any of your tweets? I don't regret anything because there is nothing you can do about it. You know, if you issue hundreds of tweets and every once in a while you have a clinker, that's not so bad. Now, my last tweet, you know, the one you are talking about perhaps was the one about being, in quotes, wiretapped, meaning surveilled. Guess what? It's turning out to be true. So there you have it, Michael, all the explanations, all the evidence to the contrary, saying you were wiretapped by your predecessor. He has found a way that he wins, right or wrong.
I mean, that's the Trump style, Brian. No retreat, no surrender. Keep on asserting it, and I think some portion of the public is going to believe it. And again, you know, I'm struck this early presidency has been in a state of total chaos. He's been rebuked by courts. There's been some minor staff shakeups. You know, the guy forgot to sign the executive orders he had a press event about the other day, and he's still around 40% in the polls, which is only a couple points lower than his electoral count, the percentage he got in the election. So his base is basically on board. And, you know, people sometimes say, could you see him getting impeached over this Russia stuff? I don't see congressional Republicans feeling intense pressure at this point because Donald Trump doubles down. They throw Susan Rice out there, and the conservative base loves it, and it's working for him. So it's that's life under Trump.
The Senate Judiciary Committee today voted to advance Supreme Court nominee and federal judge Neil Gorsuch to the Senate floor, where he will likely face a filibuster. I spoke earlier this evening to Democratic Senator Richard Blumenthal of Connecticut. Importantly, he sits on the Judiciary and Armed Services Committees, and I started off by asking him whether he agreed with a headline that was out today that said the process Casey just walked us through will change the U.S. Senate forever.
It will change the Senate forever if, in fact, the 60-vote threshold is struck down. But the Senate has operated by bipartisan consensus because the feeling has been over many years that these nominees should be approved by more than a razor-thin majority. They serve for life in the highest court in the land, and I would regret this very destructive step if the Republican leadership chooses to invoke this nuclear option.
And when people say they question why the Democrats are going to the mat on this one, which is in effect net replacement for the late Justice Antonin Scalia, and not the next one, what do you say to that?
He has evaded all of our key questions on adherence to well-established precedent relating to women's health care and privacy. He has left the inescapable conclusion that he will adhere to the Trump litmus test, which is overturning Roe v. Wade and striking down sensible legislation to control gun violence, and he's out of the mainstream on fundamental core precedents. So this seat is not a Republican or a Democratic seat. It should be a mainstream jurisprudential seat, and that's what Neil Gorsuch has failed to show.
I've heard it said today that while the Gorsuch matter may be regressive for the Senate and how it operates, the progressive news might be the Senate Intelligence Committee. Do you think it will stand as the definitive investigation into these Russian ties?
What we need is a special prosecutor, because neither Intelligence Committee, House or Senate, nor even a special commission can bring criminal charges. And more evidence is mounting that criminal charges will be appropriate at some point against people in this country who may have colluded with the Russian meddling in this election. So my hope is that a special prosecutor who can bring criminal charges and hold accountable the people who need to be held accountable criminally in a court of law and conduct a fair, impartial, vigorous investigation.
Do you have any reaction to Jared Kushner visiting Iraq before Secretary of State Tillerson?
I think that this White House is unorthodox and unprecedented. in the way it conducts foreign affairs as well as domestic policy. What concerns me most is the potential conflicts of interest that are rife in the White House, and I think there needs to be more inquiry into what those conflicts of interest are and how Kushner and others may be involved in them.
Connecticut Democratic Senator Richard Blumenthal, thank you very much for your time tonight.
Thank you.
This coming weekend at Mar-a-Lago in Florida, dinner guests can expect to see the leader of China, a two-day kind of Floridian summit. I was surprised to read tonight the head of planning for that event, getting the president in the game and prepped, is Jared Kushner, the 36-year-old son-in-law who today was in Baghdad. You've written about him tonight. Kushner has a singular and almost untouchable role in Trump's White House. What do we need to know about Jared Kushner?
Well, a couple of things. First of all, Jared Kushner's portfolio is sort of constantly, expanding and ballooning at almost, comical speeds. And he's taken on all these roles. But I will say the first role that we realized Jared Kushner was taking on, even during the campaign, during the transition, and certainly now in the White House, was that of sort of shadow Secretary of State. He was the person, when you would talk to ambassadors in D.C. And diplomats, he was the administration's point person for sort of several dozen prime ministers, presidents, leaders of foreign nations who wanted to get a message to Donald Trump. So he has no real foreign policy experience other than sort of what he's picked up on the fly. But that is a role he's been playing for a while, and as we're seeing, is playing in Iraq and will play at this summit this weekend. That's his first role, but there's many more.
And Michael, resume-wise, went to Harvard. Obviously, he's married to the daughter of the President of the United States. He has experience in New York real estate, family firm, which he moved up in prominence when his father was in federal prison. But he certainly has managerial and financial experience there, but now has, as Ashley was saying, this extraordinary portfolio. Imagine, in addition to all those other duties and reimagining ways that American business, he's reimagining ways the Veterans Department can operate. Oh, by the way, prep up the boss for the summit with China's leader by the weekend.
Yeah, I mean, Brian, it's like a Monty Python sketch. I mean, we've hardly touched on the fact that he was going to do Middle East peace, and that's been forgotten now because he's reinventing the government, setting up the summit with the Chinese leader, going to Iraq. I mean, it really is kind of a parody. He has no foreign policy experience that I'm aware of. Perhaps doing some overseas business deals would qualify, and that's not nothing. That does tell you something about how the world works, but I don't even know how much he really did travel around the world for business matters. And it's just a dramatic break from the way things have been done in this country, and it's a dynastic. It's what you see in countries that have dynastic politics, where you have the
ruling family.
The ruling family, and you just need to know the son who's got the straight line to the father, and it doesn't really matter. All the father cares about is that he trusts the son completely and that the son's got his back, and doesn't matter if the son knows the difference between realism and idealism and neocons and interventionists and knows anything about international law. And so it's incredibly demoralizing to professional diplomats, to people at the State Department, and I think you can make a case that it's actually quite dangerous. Now, maybe we will all be surprised by the way this turns out, but I have to say it's very unprecedented, and I think there's reason to be concerned about it.
It's also a very special place where over 4,000 Americans lost their lives because you flew the furthest to get here 15 seconds before I have to go to a break.
Well, it's the one place where he might actually make sense. The Arab world is the one place where the absence of any qualifications other than being related to the president might actually move the needle. He might be taken seriously there because the place is full of people like him who have no qualifications but are the son-in-law of somebody or the son of somebody. I know we're making light of it, but that's the only way we can deal with this. This is just that crazy.
We are joined tonight by our congressional correspondent, Casey Hunt. Last seen on live television earlier today, while Hallie Jackson was on the air, Casey was running in pursuit of Senator Lindsey Graham. So in accordance with her job in what we keep saying is a job that pretty much looks to us 24/7. And Casey, we've asked you to come on tonight once and for all, since this is a term used every day and will be used a lot more as the week spools out. What is the nuclear option, and what's the inherent danger in invoking it?
Well, first of all, Brian, I recommend wearing flat shoes if you ever come up here on Capitol Hill, because
I do all the
high
time.
heels would not go well. But the nuclear option, we are, I think, going to be seeing a lot more drama here on Capitol Hill. It's obviously a little bit of an apocalyptic term, and the reason why we use it in the context of the Senate is because they have a very long tradition of at least trying or pretending to be nice to each other. It's a smallish group of 100 people. A lot of them served for a really long time. And the history around Supreme Court nominations is actually very largely bipartisan. Even the times when these nominations have gone down, it's been because the Senate, with both parties together, has basically said to the president, forget it, we don't want to do this, this person isn't qualified, etc. So we're in a very partisan era, and essentially the nuclear option is a change to the rules. So the Senate has a filibuster that requires 60 votes to cut off debate on something and then hold a final vote. Any final vote in the Senate usually requires a simple majority. At least that's the case for nominations and for legislation. And historically, senators have had to get to 60 votes in order to proceed to that final vote. And most Supreme Court nominations have gone through with many more than 60 votes over the years. But back in 2013, the Democrats changed the rules for simpler judicial nominations, lower judgeships, and for cabinet nominations. And it was a huge deal at the time. It caused a lot of animosity. But they left out Supreme Court nominations specifically because they are such a big deal. But now we're at the point where Democrats are so angry about Merrick Garland, they're under so much pressure from their liberal base, that they're at the point where they're just saying, forget this, there's no way we're going to come to the table on Neil Gorsuch. And Senator McConnell, who, you know, he's been around a long time. He's really an institutionalist. He's somebody that really loves the Senate. And so there was some thinking that maybe he would want to avoid this. But all indications say at this point that he is going to move to change the rules. And that would likely happen on Thursday if he does it. It would initially, you'd see a vote where they'd need to get 60. That would fail. And then McConnell would make a move to change the rules, and it would only